Hello, today we're going to talk about AAC, which stands for Alternative and Augmentative Communication. So what is AAC? AAC stands for Alternative and Augmentative Communication. Augmentative means to supplement speech and alternative means to replace it. So AAC is something that either supplements or replaces someone's speech. AAC is designed to support people with communication challenges, and there are lots and lots of different sorts and varieties. Communication aids that speak for a person are called voice output communication aids, which is shortened to VOCAs or speech output devices. Communication aids, so some involve sophisticated software or hardware, but not all of them do. Most people will use a range of communication aids depending on their situation, and there are lots and lots of different sorts. So here's a few different types. You can have symbol-based charts and books. So examples of this would be POD. They can be direct access or indirect access, and they don't run off a battery. They're fairly cheap to replace. And there's lots of different sorts available. They don't run out of battery, which is the most important thing. PECs stands for Picture Exchange Communication System. It was developed by Pyramid Educational Consultants in the 1980s. It was originally developed to support students with autism to communicate and initiate interactions. But now it's used across the world with people of all ages and a variety of cognitive, physical and communication challenges. The PECs approach is very behavioural, highly structured, and it doesn't work unless it's done very precisely. And there are 6 phases. Alphabet charts. These are really good for providing a quick way of communicating for people who are able to spell. You can customise them to meet the needs of the individual. They don't need batteries and there is nothing to break. They're also cheap and easy to replace. Simple voice output communication aids. The simplest ones tend to be sturdy, battery powered with a built-in microphone which records messages. They're otherwise known as light tech aids. They're easy to operate and quick to update and change. There are some single message and some that are more complex. They rely on pre-recorded speech and they tend to work well with those who struggle with touchscreens. Complex voice output communication aids. They tend to make use of computer-generated speech, although sometimes you can also have the capacity to pre-record messages as well. The voices and accents available are developing all the time. They've got international voices, some of them have regional accents now, which is really, really good. Most are based around computer technology and have touch screens which vary in size. They can be based either around mainstream technology such as iPads, apps for iPads, or they can be purpose-built, which are a lot more expensive. There are symbol and written versions available. So PECs, more about PECs. It's divided into 6 phases. The first 3 phases are highly structured. So phase 1 is how to communicate. Phase 2 is distance and persistence. Phase 3A is simple discrimination. Phase 3B is conditional discrimination. Phase 4 is sentence structure. Phase 5 is attributes. Attributes is separate. Phase 5 is answering what do you want, and phase 6 is commenting. Before you start with PECs, you need to establish what the student is motivated by. It could be items which can include food and non-food. It should be a short, repeatable activity that can be given immediately. Before you start, you must prepare the resources to make sure that you have the symbols that relate to the motivators you've identified. And spares is also a very good idea because they do get lost. A PECs folder, and your speech therapist can order one of these for you if you need one. There are also PECs forms that we can send you if you would like to do this. So phase 1, you always need 2 people in order to teach phase 1. Phase 1 teaches how to communicate. There's no understanding of what the symbol means at this point, and it teaches how to initiate a communication. Once the students initiate that they want an item by reaching for the actual thing, we then teach the student to pick up the symbol, reach across to the person with the item and release the symbol into the person's hand. This is done through hand over hand support with no verbal instructions, no talking. It's really important that when this happens, we reinforce within half a second. So phase 2 is called distance and persistence. For this one, you get to use the binder or your folder for the first time. You still only use one picture for this, and it goes on the outside cover of the folder. Slowly, after each exchange, the trainer will move away from the student, teaching them that the person doesn't have to be sitting in front of them with the item in order for them to ask for it. It means that they are learning that even if you are on the opposite side of the room or in a different room altogether, they can still ask you for something that they want. Once this has been done, the next stage is to slowly move the binder away from the student or the folder, and you as the teacher stay still. And this teaches them that they don't need to have the binder in front of them in order to ask for things. Look out for additional prompts. Keep an eye on each other and make sure that you're not doing accidentally prompting non-verbally. So helpful hints for phase 2. The second prompter is still involved if they're required. They loiter, shall we say. It's important to use multiple reinforcers, so making sure you've got several things that the person is motivated by. Still only using one thing at a time, but just to mix it up a bit and make sure they don't get bored. Assign the binder to a specific location. That could be the back of a chair, on a specific table, it could be on a peg in the hallway. As long as it's accessible and they know where it is, it doesn't matter where it's kept. The important thing is that it's accessible, so not in a locked cupboard, not outside of a locked door. All of those things are very important. The student's not responsible for returning the symbol to the binder. That is the job of the person helping. The student is responsible for returning the binder or the folder to the place that you've decided it should be kept. So if it's a peg, returning it to the peg at the end of each turn. And remember, we're still not teaching what the symbols mean. It's very important still not to use verbal prompts. Verbal prompts are very, very difficult to get rid of once they are in. Once they are a part of a communication, they're very difficult to remove. Phase 2 needs to be practiced at all the other phases as well. So from phase 2 onwards, you need to make sure that they can still communicate in a variety of environments, for a variety of food items and non-food items, with a variety of people and across a variety of obstacles. So phase 3 is split into 2. Phase 3A is discriminating between a highly preferred item and a distractor. So something that is neutral, that they don't really want, they're not interested in. So the way I describe this is, if you give me a choice between chocolate and cake, if I can have both, it's a bonus. If I can only choose one, it doesn't really matter which one because they're both nice. If you give me a choice between chocolate and Brussels sprouts, if I choose the wrong one and I choose Brussels sprouts, I'm going to learn very quickly that is not the one that I want. So I'm going to learn to differentiate and discriminate between the symbols. So that's why we always start this way. It's an important phase as it teaches them what is on the symbol and that matters. We follow the 4-step error correction method, and it's very important that this is done properly, otherwise, unfortunately, PECs falls apart. As I've said, it doesn't work to use 2 preferred items at this stage because you don't know what the right answer is, and if both are preferred, it doesn't matter to them which one they choose. So 4-step error correction. This is what it looks like. So first, you model. They've given you the wrong picture, they've rejected the thing that they've chosen, and you model. You point to the picture and get them to look at it because that's the right one. You prompt, so you hold out your hand as a cue for them to give you the symbol. And when they hand it over, you say, yes, well done, but you don't give them the object, okay, because they still actually haven't got it right. You would provide a time delay between the prompt and the repeat by doing a switch, so turn over the book, distract them, maybe do head, shoulders, knees and toes, or some other activity, run up and down on the spot, hokey cokey, whatever they are motivated by is absolutely fine. And then you repeat and try again. PECs suggests that you can do this as many times as your child will tolerate it. Obviously they're not getting the item when they get it wrong, so some of our students get very frustrated. I will tend to not go past 2 trials before I give up and go back to phase 3 or 2. Phase 3B is very similar, but this time you are discriminating between 2 preferred items. So this phase checks that what they're exchanging for is actually what they want. So we use something called a correspondence check, and it's very, very essential for PECs to be successful. It's important to check that the student is asking for what they think they're asking for. If you don't follow the process, the student doesn't actually learn to discriminate between symbols. All they learn is, I use a symbol, I get something nice. And we need them to understand what it is that they're asking for. And you need to continue to do correspondence checks at intervals throughout the student's use of PECs, just to make sure that they are still asking for what they think they're asking for. So your first step is entice and wait for an exchange. When they give you a symbol, you offer them the item, or items even, and say, take it or here. We don't name it at this point because that would be a prompt. So we just say, take it. And if they get it right, you praise, yes, it's a dog, well done. That's if the symbol that they have given you matches the item that they take. If they get it wrong, you have to block, and then you do a 4-step error correction. And remember that you are teaching to the reach. So the one that they reach for, the item that they reach for, is the item that they want, not the item, not the symbol that they gave you. Okay? As soon as a child can discriminate between 2 highly preferred items with 90% accuracy, then you can begin adding additional highly preferred symbols to the front of the binder. You would move to 3, then 4, then 5. I find using a tray makes this part easier because it's very, very difficult to hold 5 items in your hand and block if they reach for the wrong one. It's also harder to see which one they're reaching for if you've got everything in one hand. So, top PECs tips. The child owns the PECs book, or the person owns the PECs book. The organisation is up to them. As long as they can find things inside the PECs book, it doesn't have to be neat and tidy. It doesn't need to make sense to us. It needs to make sense to them. Obviously, if they can't find things, then we need to work on that. The PECs book should be kept in the same place at all times, so that they know where it is when they need something. And in terms of what to do if things are not available, It is absolutely okay once you are past phase 3 to say no. Yes, at phase 1, 2 and 3, you have to give them the thing that they've asked for, because those are sort of part of very specific sessions. Once you get past that and you're into just them asking for things all the time, it is okay to say no. It's absolutely fine to say, it's not time for ice cream, it's 9 o'clock in the morning, no, we're not having ice cream now. If you can tell them when that is going to be a possibility, then that's great, maybe you can put it on a schedule. If not, it's still okay to say, no, it's not time for that now. So there's plenty of myths and misconceptions about PECs. There's a misconception that PECs is only for those who don't speak. I personally have used it very successfully with some students who were verbal, but they weren't able to functionally ask for things that they needed. There's also a misconception that I haven't written down here, that PECs is only for people with autism. It was originally designed for people with autism, but since then it has become used, and there's lots of research on its use with all sorts of different disabilities and problems with communication. There's a misconception that PECs only teaches people to request. This is where we start with PECs, because we work on the what's in it for me principle. There has to be a motivation and a reason for the person to communicate, and that is, I want it, okay? But as you go through the rest of the stages, they do teach emotions, commenting, questions, all of those things are part of PECs. There's a misconception that using PECs will stop the person from speaking. This is not true. In fact, it is one of the few methods of AAC that actually support speech development. If the person asks for something using PECs, then we have to honour it, and that will lead to them being spoiled. As I said before, it is absolutely fine once you are past phase 3B to say no when someone asks for something. If a verbal child learnt the word chocolate and that's all they asked for, you wouldn't give them chocolate every time they asked for it. It is the same with PECs. There's also a misconception that any picture, symbol or visual schedule is a PEC. It's not, it's a symbol. PECs is the system that we're using. Now we move on to POD. So POD stands for Pragmatic Organisation Dynamic Display, which is a big mouthful, and that's why we refer to it as POD. So Gail Porter developed POD, and in 1995 she wrote the following quote: "A child who uses speech will independently select the words she wishes to use from the vast array of words she hears or sees used every day. A child who uses AAC will independently select the words she wishes to use from the vocabulary that other people have chosen to model and for aided symbols made available for her to use." So this is why POD is different. So in terms of vocabulary development, a normally developing child will have a vocabulary of around 2,000 words by the age of 5 years. And between the age of 4 and 5 years, a child learns 532 new words on average. How many symbols do you think most of our symbols or your children have in their textbooks? I don't think it's 2,000. So, aided language acquisition. In simple terms, you get out what you put in. If you want to get aided language out, you have to put aided language in. A student can't learn symbol communication if we don't model it and show them how. It's the same for sign language. If you want someone to sign, you have to show them how to sign. They don't just pick it up out of the ether. So POD is great because it has fewer limitations for the learner in what they can express. There is no pressure to perform. There's no limits in communication functions. The communication function is clear from the start. It gives the opportunity for real communicative autonomy. There are no symbols to lose. It encourages additions and changes as are needed, and there's plenty of room to grow and develop. So Pod, there are many different variations, moving from a single page opening up to 3-page opening, and some of these have over 100 words per page. So Pod books and how they work. So the first page in every Pod book is called a chat page. This has quick things that you might want to say without going into the book in detail. So it's got things like stop, wait, more, finished, excuse me, goodbye, help, I don't want to do it, all of those sorts of things. If you have more to say, you point to the symbol that says more to say. The 2 that's in the corner tells you where to go next, i.e. you find the tab that's labelled page 2. Page 2 is all about sentence starters or branches. Again, the numbers and colours show you where to navigate to next. For example, if you choose I want, you navigate to page 11. From here, you can make a whole sentence and navigate further onto other items. For example, if you want swing, you would point to outside activities and navigate to page 11D. From here, there are more specific options about which activity you want to choose. If you make a mistake, which is absolutely okay to do, you can use the Oops button on the right. Or you can choose the Go back to the beginning of the section. Or go to Categories, which is number 7. As I said, it's absolutely fine to make mistakes. In fact, we almost want to model that making a mistake is fine. We don't expect our students to get this perfectly right every time, and I don't expect the people supporting them to get it right first time every time either. The more you practice, the easier it gets. The categories page helps you to navigate to various topics and options. Each book is individually made, and sometimes I have made mistakes, so if there's a navigation missing, please do let me know and I can update it for you. Each book has over 100 pages, and there is a definite possibility that I might have missed some things. Okay, next we're talking about Proloquo to Go, which is a symbol-based app available on iPad and Apple devices. It uses symbol stick symbols, which is different to Pod. Pod uses BoardMaker symbols. It's easy to add and delete items, and there are lots of options for grid sizes. You can use photos and add these online as you work. Some top tips for using Proloquo to Go. Do model the communication that you want with the person. As with Pod, you get out what you put in. Do allow the student or person to explore the device. It's okay for them to do a bit of repetition and babbling using the device while they explore it and get used to it. Start with simple structured tasks. I've done games where I've added the vocabulary needed for a specific game so that they can ask for things. That works quite well. Do make sure that the settings icon is turned off, as this reduces accidental additions and nonsense buttons. It also stops students from deleting the entire app, and I have had it handed back to me in Chinese once because this hadn't been turned off. Do make sure that the voice you use is appropriate to the age and gender of the person. There are different voices available, there are different accents available, and it is best to try and match that to the age and gender of the student, unless they choose otherwise. So this diagram shows you all the different iPad apps for communication support. As you can see, there are many, many, many options. Do explore it and see if you like others more than Proloquo. I've had experience with several types, and Proloquo is probably my favourite that I've experienced. There are some free options, but they are not editable in the same way that Proloquo is. But there is a cost attached, unfortunately.